Buongiorno, hello, welcome to Valentina's Corner. This time I would like to talk about a tour of mine entitled Women of the Renaissance. Working as tour guide in Florence, I've come to lead many different kinds of tours. My chosen workplace is the museum. My aspiration is to become a museum educator, but since in Italy there are so few posts, I consider myself a freelance museum docent. And even if I lack the title, I embrace the work philosophy of a museum educator or teacher, if you wish. But this tour is an outdoor tour, a walking tour of Florence. Whenever I'm outside, I envisage myself as wearing the hat of the historian, which you might think I already am as art historian, but I have mentally to switch from an object-based mode to a story-based one. Studying the history of art, I found out that it's kind of full of women. They're starting to get the attention they deserve, and so it's fairly easy for me to include these figures in a gallery talk in the museums of Florence, as I often do. On the contrary, the city of Florence, at first sight, doesn't seem to shed light on the women that shape its history. No piazza, no street is entitled after any of the important historical women. So I wish to lend my voice to tell the stories of these great women of the past. Even if it's not easy to find their presence, to those fascinated by history, only the thought that they walked in these streets, that they lived in this or that palace, and to be able to walk the same path is like time traveling, and you can feel a deep connection with these historical figures. During the tour, I try to weave places and stories together with the help of a few images. I focus on very different women who had different roles. Sometimes they were hidden behind the greater fame of their husbands. But today, I want to talk about one woman. She was the wife of a very important man, but she wasn't overshadowed by him. She was famous at her time. Her name was Laura Battiferri, and she was a Renaissance poetess. Daughter of a nobleman, Laura was born in 1523 in Urbino, a place where women actively participated to the public social life. They were highly educated and really brilliant, so she was given a good literary education. At 26, after the death of her first husband, Laura married the Florentine artist Bartolomeo Ammannati, whom she had met in Rome. Laura loved living in Rome, but her husband decided to move back to Florence because he had greater chances to get commissions here. Laura didn't like Florence at first, probably because the move brought to a sudden stop her starting career as a poetess. The couple owned a villa in Maiano, on the hills around Florence, but they stayed also in a still existing palace overlooking the Arno in Florence. Looking outside her windows, she compared the blue waters of the Tevere River of Rome to the muddy waters of the Florentine River, and she wrote that she felt, and I quote, buried alive on the Arno. But Laura was mistaken, and her talent was recognized, and her poetry was celebrated by the poetic circles in Florence and at the Medici court. Her literary debut was in 1560 when she published her primo libro, her first books of poems. The volume was dedicated to the Duchess of Florence, Eleonora de Toledo. Eleonora and Laura, if nothing else, shared one thing: their portrait pegged Agnolo Bronzino. He was a portraitist of the Medici Dukes, a friend of her husband, the fellow artist Ammannati, and a dilettante poet. So he shared an interest with Laura. They became friends and they wrote poems to each other. Here is a postcard of the portrait of Laura Battiferri by Bronzino in the Loeser collection in the Museum of Palazzo Vecchio here in Florence. I personally find it a bit frustrating that we're not able to meet her eyes. She's not entirely disclosing her soul to the viewer, but Bronzino knew Laura well, and he was able to tell us so much about her anyway. There are two key elements. For poetry lovers of the 16th century, these references were quite clear. First, the profile. The profile portrait, almost like a medal. It shows her characteristic feature, her nose, a very important nose. But Laura shows it off because the famous Italian poet Dante Alighieri had an important nose too. Second, the book she's holding in her hands is a book of sonnets by Petrarca, the other famous Italian poet. He was famous for his platonic love for his muse, who was named Laura too. So her name is really part of her identity as a poetess. And in fact, her first book of poems was inspired by Petrarca love poetry. We don't know what she thought about her second name, Battiferri. It was her father's name, so a family name, but it literally means iron beater. And I believe that for a poet, someone used to play with words, it conveys her ambition and her iron-like strength in pursuing fame for herself. We don't know with any certainty when the portrait was made, but probably in 1555, so soon after she moved to Florence, before the publication of her book, and when she was in her early 30s. She lived until her 60s and long enough to see herself elected a member of two literary academies. As a member of the Accademia degli Intronati of Siena, she had to choose an ironic pen name. Hers was La Sgraziata, the graceless, which was clearly the opposite of what she was. I hope you liked these short Women of the Renaissance story. If you did, please share it with your friends. Thank you for watching Valentina's Corner. Until next time, goodbye.